Today we will be doing another Glenn Loury video. Okay, so the last time I did one of these, it took me like 2 hours to get through half of the video. It was when he had an interview on Reason that I think was about an hour long. This is him giving a speech for an hour and a half. Oh, sorry. It's about an hour and 10 minutes of a speech, about 20 minutes of open questioning. We are not going to be watching the whole thing. It is not that interesting. So I watched the whole thing last night, and I want to kind of give like an overview of it, and then we're going to go to certain points in the video where I want to kind of talk about like what he's getting at here. Okay, so Glenn Loury, the crux of this video is him talking about personal experiences. And to be fair, he says that more or less in the beginning, that the tone of this speech is very personal. There's a lot of personal information. And I would say that's somewhat of an understatement. It's almost entirely his personal anecdotes and how he's like formed his opinions and things that have shaped his life, blah, 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 over time. Which, if you're writing like a self-help book, explaining how, oh, you know, my family was filled with criminals and no good nicks, whatever, and I managed to rise above, that could be pretty good, I suppose. But that's not his shtick. He's a Harvard economist who writes papers talking about issues and how we solve them. So just like harping on about like personal anecdotes is useless from understanding a problem that you want to understand empirically and provide potential solutions for. It's kind of useless. But what it does is it creates a very emotionally loaded argument, which works very much in his favor. Now, Glenn Loury, I don't know why I said that so bad. He generally comes from that libertarian sort of bend where he tries putting like the individual at the forefront of everything, because fundamentally all your experiences are to your own, so you can just make better decisions. Now, the argument is very appealing in American society because like you can just always make yourself better, and to an extent, it's true. I mean, I think it's almost like a slur that goes against people who argue from my, I guess, vantage point or whatever, where it's like, if I talk about systemic issues, it means I'm absolving individuals of their responsibility. And to an extent, that's what part of his point is. In this, he talks about how he made Loretta Scott King cry when he was giving a speech in like the 80s or something. Where was I going with that? And the crux of his point is like, while it is correct to identify these systemic issues, we need to not use these systemic issues to justify our bad behavior or us not succeeding or get trapped in this poverty. But it's sort of circular because it's because of those circumstances that create that culture, or the victimhood mentality is more or less what he's getting at there. It's these circumstances he's describing that we can affect at a top-down level with policies designed to increase well-being, provide opportunities to these areas, that can rectify this culture. Is there this sense of like individual responsibility at the core of it? I suppose, but I want to approach that from a standpoint of providing more opportunities at a societal level, and then you can expect more from people within that. Now, the other part of what he says, which once again is just like it's just a straw man. It really just is that someone like me who looks at things from like a societally deterministic level, like, if we put people in a bad situation, I know that probabilistically most of those people will eventually reach a bad outcome. That's just how it works. If you put all those same people in a good situation, they will most probably all be a good outcome. Like, for example, I have a family member who is addicted to drugs. I'm not addicted to drugs. We both grew up in roughly the same environment. I have a job where I make okay money. You know, I'm working on a master's degree, nearly finished with that. Probably going to go to law school after or pursue a PhD. Probably never going to be addicted to drugs. My brother, or, well, spoiler, it's my brother. My family member who had those similar problems, had that similar upbringing, went left of center. Now, here's the thing. Our lives weren't exactly the same. We both had different trials and tribulations as we were growing up. And I understand, like, what happened in his life that led him that way. But it's not... they were close enough to where most people in my situation would find some measure of success. That's not to say every single person who had my upbringing should find some measure of success when you're born into middle class or whatever lifestyle. But it is what it is, you know? And the same thing goes for someone born into bad circumstances. Now, maybe if I was born, you know, in a lower income area, you know, 8 out of 10 people go nowhere in their life. Now, 8 out of 10 still means 2 out of 10 do go somewhere in their life. That's just how math works. And I feel like there's this disregard of arguing how events probabilistically affect groups of people in pursuit of this like weird philosophical idea of like you control your whole life. There's even a point in this. I don't think I have it highlighted because I watched it last night and then I went over this just now and I grabbed some clips from what I remembered. I probably should have done it then, but I was tired and I just went to sleep. Where he talks about like the concept of like bounded individualism or bounded reason. He uses the word bounded, I know for sure. Hold on, I can probably find it right here. Whoops, the fuck? Bounded. Closed a bounded structure. Okay, I don't think he even says that correctly. Whatever. But bounded is like this concept, and to say that individuals still have free will, but it's in a very restricted sense, at which point you're just saying they don't have free will. It's in this very determined way. Or they don't have free will in any meaningful way if you're bounding it. All right, let's enough preloading all this shit. Let's get to some of the fun stuff.
Years, yeah, 40 years. I have expended considerable effort trying to explain to myself and to the world why the subordinate status of African Americans persists within the United States. Some of this thinking was summed up in my monograph, The Anatomy of Racial Inequality, which was published by Harvard University Press. That book sketched a theory of race applicable to the social and historical circumstances of the United States.
All good here so far, I guess?
Speculating on why racial inequalities persist. It advanced a conceptual framework for thinking about social justice in matters of race. It was one part social science, one part social criticism, and one part social philosophy.
The philosophy thing is where he starts walking at the deep end, because his philosophy stems from this like liberal individualism. When I say liberal there, I don't mean like left wing in the United States. What I mean is the like Enlightenment sort of liberalism, as opposed to like monarchism. And it's a focus on individual freedoms, private property, all that shit that basically underpins our Constitution. So like that's where he's running into an issue here when you try and like make that a major focal point in what you're talking about. It just makes it almost useless.
Themes that were pursued in successive chapters that I call racial stereotypes, racial stigma, and racial justice. Those derive from a synonymous series of lectures that I had presented at the Du Bois Institute at Harvard the year before. I wish to fix ideas for today's presentation by briefly reviewing some of those arguments because I believe, along with the great UCLA sociologist Rogers Brubaker, whose book Ethnicity Without Groups has much impressed me, that one ought not to invoke racial aggregates as the subjects of social analysis unreflectively. Race is a deceptively dangerous category of social analysis, I believe. It must be handled with care. And so please bear with me. I know you've come here to hear me talk about race and crime and punishment in America and so on, but I want to assure you that the relevant...
Okay. I think we got what we need from that. I didn't record really an endpoint, just that I remember thinking this was kind of interesting because when he talks about like these three pillars, one part social science, one part social criticism, and one part social philosophy. And when he talks about the philosophy later on, I don't know if I really have a timestamp for that either. It's very long and very repetitive, so I'm sure he says things akin to it multiple times. He talks about how, like, you know, while there are these structures in place, at the end of the day, we need to hold people accountable for the decisions they make or the actions they take in a given society. Okay, I have no problem with that. Pretty much nobody does. I don't know what his point is there. I don't say, oh, Timmy shot an old woman in the face to steal her purse. Damn social circumstances can't penalize Timmy. No, that's not how that works. You penalize Timmy, but built into that penalization is this conception of rehabilitation to try and prevent Timmy from doing crimes in the future. That's the point. The point shouldn't be what we have in our current criminal justice system, where, and he even gets to this in his Q&A. It's almost like he's just having like some form of cognitive dissonance. It's really weird because I think it was something talking about like sentencing in like his Q&A and how like he disagrees with all these things, said like, oh, this is racist, or that was racist, or that was really bad, and we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that. But it's like, yeah, you're arguing, you agree with me. You agree with me. Our criminal justice system isn't designed to rehabilitate people. It's designed to punish people. And by punishing people and then targeting that in areas that are predominantly black, you end up fracturing these communities. And those punishments don't just, oh, I remember what it was. He talks about how like felons are disenfranchised after serving their sentence. Yeah, that's intentional because systemic racism. That is not an accident that after the Civil Rights Act, which made black people allowed to vote across the whole country, that all of a sudden we decided to disenfranchise black people after, you know, targeting the massive machinations of the criminal justice system towards them. I probably used machinations there wrong, whatever. Mechanisms is what I meant. The massive mechanisms. That just sounds awkward too. After targeting the criminal justice system towards these groups of people and bringing our prison population from 200,000 to 2 million over the course of 20 years, 30 years? I think it's like 20 or 25 years. Mostly, or very disproportionately, targeting black communities. This was intentional. This happened under Reagan, under Nixon, with the consent of Carter. Because Carter was also a little racist. Spoiler. Democrats also do the racism. It's just usually not as bad as when Republicans do it. Yeah, Nixon started it. Reagan blew it the fuck up. H.W. Bush continued it. Clinton, it didn't rise as much under Clinton, but it did increase under Clinton. And then it started peeling back like a little bit under H.W. Bush. It's complicated, but yeah, like focusing on how like, oh well, we still need to call a spade when Timmy does a crime. You know, we need to not absolve him of that. It's like we don't. We never have. We're arguing that our justice system needs to encapsulate circumstances and attempt to address those circumstances as part of the punishment. And the goal of the punishment is just to prevent crime. Now that is by direct incapacitation, i.e. you're in prison, you can't commit a crime, and through rehabilitation, whereby when we let you out, you're less likely to commit a crime, i.e. If you get high and, you know, rob someone because you need money, then, you know, we get you like rehab as necessary to like get you off drugs, and we provide you with jobs training to help you get a job when you're out. Therefore, you do not have the economic worries that drove you to these things to begin with. It's pretty fucking simple. So the next part we're gonna go to is when he makes like MLK's widow cry, and like, I don't want to overly denigrate this dude, because I don't know. I do a little bit, I'll be honest here. But like, this just comes off as that like, well, you know, they're just mad because I'm saying what, and he says this multiple times, like, you know, I can't shield what I'm saying just because they take it personally. And he talks about how MLK's wife, well, you know, she's a figure because she was married to MLK, but she's not an academic, she's not a smart person, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't say smart person, I'm sorry, I don't want to put those words in his mouth. But basically says, like, she's nobody. Like, I'm just calling it as it is.
Professor Loury, don't you realize it's more complicated than that? But Mrs. King's extraordinary silent commentary was simply to offer her tears. Think about it.
How dare him?
Here was the widow of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a woman who...
Sorry, to give the context around this, he had just given a speech in front of like a black civil rights thing, and he was considered sort of like a symbol of like their achievement, right? He was the first, I think he was the first tenured black Harvard professor after the Civil Rights Act or Civil Rights Movement. So here he was like, oh, talk about this thing. And then he basically says like, it's your guys' fault for being criminals, is like the crux of his speech. Like, you need to be better. You can't just blame racist people for racism.
More than any other single person embodied the black freedom struggle in America. No, she was not a thought leader, not a political actor in any meaningful sense, not a strategist, not an intellectual, but still.
Okay, so he did kind of call her dumb. Just that she's no one of consequence, but she's still an enormous figure because her husband got shot.
She was an enormous figure. And so, though I didn't take her response to what I had to say as probative at the cognitive level, I didn't conclude, oh, if she thinks this, then maybe I'm wrong and had better go back to the drawing board, didn't see her as a serious public intellectual, still, I surely took her seriously as Dr. King's widow. This, I thought, is an iconic person who represents something sacred in a civic sense. Her husband, while serving his people and his country, had been murdered at the age of 39, only a few years older than I was standing there at that moment. Here sits his widow. I should, and I did, feel honored to be in her presence. And, by the way, her seat at the table was just next to mine. I had only to look down into her face to see those tears. So I stood there by my seat, surveying a table with maybe 10 people sitting around it, and just to my left, as it happened, sat Mrs. King. And as I wound up my argument to the effect that the civil rights movement was off the track, that the protest era was basically over, that the primary obstacles to the attainment of equality for African Americans were internal barriers, having to do with our own behavior, how we organized our communities.
See, this is like the crux of his argument and why it's really shitty. Like, this philosophy thing, this is where he's just focusing on, like, guys, it's really our fault. We got to fix this ourselves.
The civil rights movement was off the track, that the protest era was basically over, that the primary obstacles to the attainment of equality for Africa...
Okay, hold on. I actually want to split these up real quick. So to respond to that first part where he basically, like, denigrates her or whatever, he does it a couple of times in this and talks about critics of his and how, like, you're just mad because what I'm saying is true. It kind of reminds me of the edgy kid in like fucking high school who, you know, says something rude, crude, hurtful, whatever. And when people get upset by him saying something that's probably inaccurate, maybe a little wrong, who cares? Their defense in general is like, you just hate me because I'm right. Like, I'm willing to speak the truth. I am darkness, you know? Like, that is what he's getting at. I don't need to consider your feelings because, like it's actually, it's unironically the Ben Shapiro thing where he hold on. I guess I should explain this. Ben Shapiro reason. Emotion. I think this is it. Facts don't care about your feeling. Where the fuck is it? Ah, fuck it, whatever. I'll just explain it. It's really not that important. I don't need a clip to show it. Basically, recently, Ben Shapiro said something like, we can't use emotion to create policy, because that's how you end up with bad policy, because emotion clouds everything. We need to be these stoic, he doesn't literally say this, but like the crux of it is like, we need to be these stoic, emotionless creatures to create the best policy, because policy exists objective to human well-being. And it's like, no, you're dumb and you're stupid to say that. And that's more or less what Glenn Loury's getting at in a much more articulate, less stupid way. But the crux of the argument's the same. We're like, well, I know it's upsetting you that I'm saying the truth, but I don't need to take people's feelings or emotions into account when doing this. And it's like, but he's using that as a defense to like himself. It's more a cognitive defense to why he shouldn't need to reevaluate his positions or look at it than it is like an actually reasonable statement. Like, could they be irrational just because they're emotional? They could be. But you could also be irrational, as he talks about multiple times, how he grew up in this culture, how it's something that clouds him, how he wants to like run away from this, how he needs to balance like his perspective on the black community, being critical with his membership of it. Like, he talks about this. So,
wound up my
whatever, but we'll move it then.
My argument to the effect that the civil rights movement was off the track, that the protest era was basically over, that the primary obstacles to the attainment of equality for African Americans were internal barriers.
So this is what's funny. This he ostensibly said in the 80s. I think he said he was 39. I guess I could look him up and do some math. It had to have been in the 70s or the 80s. It couldn't have been much after that. I mean, it almost definitely, because he said after Civil Rights Act and whatever. This had to have been in the 70s or 80s. And I think he said this was also on the crux. He said this one Ronald Reagan was going to get reelected. So this had to have been in 84. He says that somewhere else in here when he's giving this speech. So this was in 84. This is as, let's see, incarcerated population 1984. So we had state and federal prisons. This one might be the low number. Okay, so this is basically when in the 70s is basically when the war on drugs basically began under Nixon. We went 200,000. So when he gave this speech, we had already doubled our prison population. And by the 90s, we had doubled it again. And through, wow, got really bad under Clinton too, huh? Oh, yeah, okay, this is the low number. So all this is a little higher than it looks. So this doesn't count jails, if I remember correctly. It's state and federal prison population. It's not counting jails, which are people serving under a year or waiting to be, waiting for their criminal trial. So this number is low. This goes up to 2 million if you count people in jails and other forms of incarceration. So he's saying that in the midst of mass incarceration. I don't think anything strikes like just how ignorant he's saying. Where guys, the barriers we're experiencing now are internal. Like, oh yeah, this has nothing to do the war on drugs targeting black people, like demonstrably so. There's tons of quoted like Reagan and Nixon era officials talking about it. The wanton contempt for black people, the demonization of them as like these drug-addled people who we need to bring to heel. There's nothing about this that is systemic in nature. This is why it's stupid. He identifies like a social critique. What did he say? It was just fuck. I wish I wrote it down, but whatever. It's social critique, a philosophical, 3 parts. Basically, he said social, philosophical, and structural. Maybe I'll say it was structural. I don't think it was structural is the word he used, but whatever. And here, when talking about it, he's like, guys, we're past all those issues. Did you see they gave us rights in the 1960s? Sure, I'm in the midst of them ripping those rights away from us, but yeah, like this has to just stem from a monumental ignorance or arrogance where like he just like I feel like he wants to believe like we can do this all by ourselves. There's no more negative external pressures, and like he couldn't be more wrong at this juncture in his life. In the mid 80s, that's when he's like, guys, all the systemic pressures are gone. It's delusional and it's wrong. And the reason Loretta Scott King was crying was because like their, quote, crowning achievement of like, well, his perception of him being the crowning achievement of a black man going to Harvard, how they could fuck up so much with someone like Glenn Loury. And I put that like as negatively as possible because this is ridiculous. Like this is patently absurd where he could just say like, oh, our primary things are our internal barriers and our internal barriers, our communities, how we're raising our children, how we're raising our children when all the men are being taken to prison for bullshit. Oh, weird. How could that affect the raising of children in a given community when you disproportionately imprison all the males in that community? When you redline them out of like certain areas, you jam them into urban areas where the schools are underfunded. How could anything there go fucking wrong? Okay, yeah. This
needed saying at precisely this moment when the conservative Ronald Reagan sought a second term as president of the United States.
Yeah, so this is in like 83 or 84 or something.
I turned to see this woman, this iconic figure.
I mean, if he said like we need to focus on what we can do internally, so I'll give you like the way he could have said this where it wouldn't really be a problem. If he said, guys, Reagan's on his second term, we're not going to get any help, and just crying about racism right now isn't going to do anything because the people who are in charge don't give a shit. And then someone like Reagan was overwhelmingly supported at that time. The help ain't coming from there, okay? This isn't the Lyndon Johnson era. This isn't the Kennedy era, okay? We're past that. We need to figure out ways where we can like do this within our own community. Maybe it's possible, maybe it isn't, but the alternative choice of like, guys, let's like lobby the government and see if we can get jobs programs in these areas, get economic stimulus put into these areas, blah blah blah. That option ain't there, okay? And if he said that, I would have no problem, because he'd be correct. Reagan was a terrible person. You were not going to get anything from Reagan. Man, I still want to keep this video short, but I'm sure I'm probably broaching on like 40 minutes right now. That's okay. Fuck y'all. The 10 people who watch this, hopefully you watch it through. Okay, what's the... Jesus Christ. Okay, so let's talk about... This juxtaposition I feel was very awkward. So to build this up, here he's going to talk about jury nullification. Jury nullification is a legal process where basically jury's like, hey, yeah, the thing you're outlining, they did, but like, it's not a big deal. And I actually thought like this is a much more fringe thing. This is a very fringe thing that occurs. And apparently it's really not, but it kind of depends how they describe it. And it's not just black people going, oh, whatever. You can't. We don't want to put a black guy in prison, which is kind of how he does it. I quickly just looked at the Wikipedia page. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a dude who does criminal justice stuff. I don't really research race and crime that much. It incidentally pops up from my area of research, but this isn't like a major focal point of mine. So there's apparently is like, it says 5% of them are... See, I feel like it's weird to conflate hung juries with a form of jury nullification. Because like jury nullifications, when like they say like they did it but I'm not willing to convict them, well, a hung jury's like I can't really decide based off that evidence. And what they kind of say here is juries have been that they're weighing the validity or fairness of the laws themselves. I imagine this would pop up more during drug cases, particularly in the modern era where people are like, should someone be going to prison for 30 years for like possession of like a pound of cocaine? Probably not. I don't know what the exact penalty is for that, but just as an example. Or we'll just say 20 years. Probably fucking not. That seems pretty immoral. And now it definitely is more viewed that way, at least than it was 30 years ago. They also cite the CSI effect, where people just, they have a very high expectation, basically, of forensic evidence due to TV shows like CSI and Law and Order and all that shit, giving like concrete evidence. And when you end up in a jury environment, like that's just not really... It's never going to be as concrete and effective as they show in TV shows. So if you have that expectation, it's almost an impossible expectation to meet from a prosecutorial level. Like you're just never really going to get there. So he cites this, but the way he uses it, if I remember correctly, is really awkward.
Are the brothers, lovers, and sons of law-abiding residents in these same districts. For most residents of such communities, the desire for retribution is tempered by identification with the perpetrators. There, but for the grace of God, go I, or my husband, or my son.
So what he's getting at here is that our desire to punish people is clouded by our empathy. Yeah, it's true. When you can empathize with someone's circumstances, it makes you more likely to say, like, I can understand how you would have gotten there, and hopefully that would yield a lesser punishment or a more empathetic punishment as opposed to some 20-year sentence and put them in a hole for the most a decent chunk of their life. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. The problem then is on a prosecutorial end where the punishments just don't meet the crime, so it's very hard to skew that way. Similar with the drug laws we have now. What the fuck did I just do? Okay, I'm still recording. I didn't accidentally close that.
Thus, we find urban jurors voting to nullify criminal charges against guilty.
Okay, so, hold on, is this? I don't remember what he said before this. I'm not willing to go back because I didn't timestamp it. I'm not just going to wing it through his random emotionally loaded speech. But like the charges that are being nullified are probably mostly like drug charges. I doubt it's like, maybe there's some theft charges, maybe there's some smaller charges, but you're not going to have like a murderer getting jury nullified. I would have to imagine, which is what he sort of implies in the next segment. I don't know if he leads up to it before this, but
defendants and justifying their actions by saying they couldn't bear to send another young brother to prison. And we find liberal politicians from the highest crime areas who are black arguing against punitive criminal justice policies, even though they're constituents.
Okay, Okay, so oh, I actually forgot about this part. Liberal politicians from the highest
from the
crime
highest
areas.
crime areas who are black arguing against punitive criminal justice.
Yes, because punitive criminal justice system, as opposed to a rehabilitative one, just feeds the fire. It perpetuates the harm.
Justice policies, even though their constituents would gain enormously from an improvement in public safety.
Oh boy. Alright, at least you didn't say they want it. Although I think that would be technically accurate right now. I mean, this is from 4 years ago, but I know a common conservative talk point is, that I see a lot is how, well, Black Lives Matter says we need to defund the police, but these areas, they want more policing. And they're sort of correct. Like, when you're ravaged by crime, you want someone there to help, but, like, you don't want the help to be, like, you know, shooting everyone in the face who jaywalks, you know? You want some, like, proportionate type of help that improves the situation. So your communities might gain in the short term by harsh policing, i.e. maybe you'd have less criminals on the street in that moment. But the problem is when you have a retributive justice system like he's advocating for here, it just kicks the can down the hill and then ends up just with the single parenthood problem he was talking about earlier, and just undermines the whole family structure. It removes productive members from the community, or sorry, I should say potentially productive members from the community for long periods of time. And then when they finally get out, they have no skills, no means to support themselves except for going back to a life of some form of crime. Duh.
Those jurors are not fools. Those politicians are not knaves. It is a safe assumption that these are deeply conflicted people caught on the horns of an impossible dilemma. The relatively muted response of inner city residents and of their representatives to their own victimization constitutes one of the few checks on the severity of contemporary criminal justice policy in America. Were the residents of America's ghettos to demand in the name of justice and civil rights protection from the predations of criminals who just happen to be black?
Like, oh man, like he's like hitting a nail on the head sort of here. You're making people choose between like one injustice and another. Like, do I want to get like harmed by criminals? No, but I know by like engaging in this criminal justice system, people are going to get harmed monumentally more than had you chose to do nothing. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, so to speak. There is no good option here. But the way we can fix those options is from a systemic level, not just demanding individual accountability, which will then result in more people being thrown in prison, which perpetuates the cycle. Like, who the fuck? There's no good answer here. And like that's what he's like, we just need to hold each other accountable, or we need to send more black people to the American gulags, and that's what will solve our problem. And it's like, yeah, that's worked so well for the past, I don't know, 40 years. We definitely haven't seen like black poverty just increase in comparison to white people.
Then their cries would powerfully complement the trend toward law and order that has produced the mass incarceration state around us today. It would be arrogant to attribute, as some do on the right, these people's reticence to false consciousness. More plausible, more tragic, more ironic is the view that this muted response in the face of victimization is a direct and powerful reflection of their ambivalence toward and identification with the perpetrators of these crimes.
Oh yeah, their whole call to empathy is just because all black people are secretly also criminals. Good job, Glenn Loury, you fucking dipshit. Like, he's just saying like all black people identify with criminals, and that's why their muted responses get taken as a tacit approval of crime occurring. Like, it's so complicated. He's just dumbing it down so much here. Okay, we're moving to the next point because, you know, I didn't actually remember this part. I wanted to talk about him, like the jury nullification thing, and I kept watching for about another minute after that. He just kept burying himself deeper into this hole. For Glenn Loury's sake, I'm not going to let him finish this part. Actually, what's funny is I'm just going to the next minute. I listened to this for so long that this is what I wanted to go to anyway.
District attorney's position.
So this is where he's going to talk about someone who grew up in a poverty-stricken area and then like wanted to go like help people, like fight against the criminal justice system.
Upon graduation, thinking that all of our clients were guilty in a public defender. One summer's work as a public defender, the black struggle could best be pursued as a member of like many disclosed.
Shouldn't have even fast forward at all.
This young lawyer, the Jew that I did with a young black lawyer of many years are trapped. I am reminded of this delicate and perplexing dilemma from an interview that I did with a young black lawyer of many years' acquaintance who served once as prosecutor for the juvenile division of the...
Okay, I'm actually going to preempt this because I feel like it's important to, like, I've separated these parts. I've talked about how what he said is blaming this community for their faults. And what he's going into now is an anecdote of someone who came from this area, talking about a black attorney person who went and got a law degree, wanted to go help fight against the criminal justice system. Then when she got into it, she's like, oh man, look at all these criminal, horrible black people who need to be imprisoned. He just very emotionally loads it of like the atrocities that black people do to each other. There's no mystery that a person killing another person is bad. Now, this is as emotionally loaded as he could possibly fucking make it. Look at this bright girl. She went to go help her community, and then she determined the way I can do that is by prosecuting more black people. See, even when this person, as bright as they could be, was exposed to the horrors of the black community, she did the right thing and decided that the best thing she can do is prosecute people. Like, no, the best thing that this person could have done if she really wanted to help the black community is not become jaded by personal experiences and try and have a more... which is very hard to do. Not become jaded by personal experiences like your standard fucking cop does by being exposed to horrible things, but instead trying to advocate for systemic reforms that improve the circumstances people are born into and increase the tools that these people have to pull themselves out of poverty. You could do that, but instead she chose to prosecute black people because in Glenn Loury's mind, that's the honorable thing to do is when you're in a position between a rock and a hard place, the honorable thing is to choose like what Glenn Loury thinks is, the least bad position there, which isn't to have empathy with the criminals for the things they do, but to prosecute them mercilessly in our current criminal justice system. It's not look for a third option, which someone in an academic environment should do, like, hey, let's try and find a way to where we don't have to put black people in jail for 20 years and we don't make people choose we don't have to put black people in 20 years. We don't put people in a morally compromising position of choosing imprisoning someone for decades or letting a criminal walk free, a criminal in this very loose context, because once again, I doubt that jury nullifications really happen. And people are like, well, he did kill 2 people in a gang shooting, but, he was born in poverty. It's kind of a free pass. It's very strange.
The district attorney's office in my hometown.
So I wanted to preempt that to just like paint exactly what he's doing here and how this is some disingenuous shit. But his entire speech here is very emotional.
Chicago. This young woman, I'll call her Elaine because she didn't want her identified publicly disclosed, when first entering law school, never dreamed that she would become a prosecutor. Like many of her peers, she just assumed that the black struggle could best be pursued as a member of the defense bar, keeping young brothers out of prison. However, one summer's work as a...
Just to point out, once again, this is dichotomized between she either has to be a defender or a prosecutor. There's no two ways about it.
Public defender. As an aide in a public defender's office, changed all of that. I realized, I quote her, that all of our clients were guilty, some of them of the most heinous offenses. Shaken from her naivete, she applied for an assistant district attorney's position upon graduation, thinking that she'd serve her community by protecting the good people from the predations of the bad. After a brief apprenticeship, she assumed responsibility for a large number of juvenile felony cases that came into the district attorney's office. Elaine describes her experience as difficult and frustrating. She talks derisively of, quote, those little gangbangers, every one of them black or Hispanic, who are both defendants and victims in the endless stream of shooting cases that come across her desk. Quoting her, it seems that there aren't that many good guys out there. Most of these kids involved in gang-related cases, both the victims and the defendants are bad guys. Especially troubling to her, close quote, especially troubling to her is the extent to which the gangs use criminal justice system as a mere extension of their street activities.
Okay, to pause here for a second. It's actually incredible how someone can go through an entire graduate program like a fucking law degree and be so monumentally clueless to the wider systemic implications of what she's talking about. I guess she just came into that as a complete idealist. Like, I can't imagine someone entering any sort of criminal justice situation, going through any level of training that would prepare them for this. Like when you... So I'm not in law school. I know a little bit about it. Generally, you have your first year of law school where you kind of figure out what you're going to do. And then you spend the next 2 years basically like taking more specialized classes for that. If she took an internship with a district attorney, she was going to end somewhere within that realm of criminal justice. She wasn't going to go from interning there to working as a finance lawyer or what's it called? Like a marriage, what's it called, divorce attorney. You weren't going to go from one to the other. So she had to be within this realm for 2+ years. And somehow she didn't realize that, oh, people who we arrest for crimes probably did them. You didn't realize this? Like, understanding systemic forces that are at play that drive poverty, and poverty drives criminal activity, is so fundamental and simple to understand. The fact that this person he's explaining an anecdote about didn't understand that, oh, when I go to the district attorney's office, there's just going to be legions of innocent black kids who are arrested for crimes they didn't commit. No, that was never what you were going to see. And the fact you could think that's what you were going to see is incredible. Actually fucking mind-blowing. Congrats, Glenn Loury. You found the dumbest human being to ever attain a law degree, and then shared an anecdote about them. That's probably not fair. Maybe she's not the dumbest human being ever, but she's definitely went in there with some very rose-colored glasses, and then had them shattered by like the thing she should have expected going into it.
A victim in a case one day becomes a defendant the next, walking right out of the court to seek revenge against the assailant gang. Or a witness one day disappears the next as a sudden truce between the warring gangs leads him to forget what it was he claimed to have seen. So Elaine began thinking that she'd help the community protect them from bad people, she had begun to wonder, especially when dealing with gang violence, whether this was an impossible vision. She's begun to question how her office handles gang-related violence. And I could go on in this vein, but our time is limited.
Like, that's what I'm talking about. He got trapped in this weird binary. Elaine just thinks like, all I can do is be defense or prosecutor. There's definitely not like, I don't know, the American Civil Liberties Union or any other, activist organizations, the ones that he decried in the 1983 or 84 or whatever, about how they're past their prime or whatever. We definitely can't talk about that or anything. There's no third option here of like, well, let's make the criminal justice system less shitty. It's not like it's only been this shitty for like 40 fucking years. Wait, spoiler, it has. Our criminal justice system hasn't always functioned in the way it does today. Like, we used to have a very rehabilitative model that stressed, not long sentences, getting people like to be more productive. It was very focused in that manner, and it was a smaller prison population. And it was in the 60s or in the 70s where we reworked that model. And there's many reasons for it. It's very complicated, but we didn't always have that lens, and we're slowly moving away from it. But like, him and his lawyer friend Elaine apparently couldn't conceptualize anything outside of that dichotomy. The dichotomy that they're currently in, which is incredibly shallow for someone who works at Harvard or someone who bothered to go through a law program. It's incredible.
But Elaine gives further testimony, including...
Okay, I don't care anymore about Elaine. I'm done negging this human being. Let's go to him talking about his family. This is like the last little thing where... the point here is just to talk about how he basically just emotionally like buries the lead here so fucking hard.
Person. I'm thinking, for example, of my Uncle Mooney.
So he's just talking about how he grew up, and he's talking about the cultural circumstances he was born into, all the people he's surrounded to, and pointing out how like these were choices all these people made. Apparently not in a vacuum.
He was a legitimate small businessman and barber and dry cleaner, but he sold marijuana out of the back of his barbershop routinely. I'm thinking of...
What's funny is everything he just says here could be very easily explained by like the most basic criminological theories if you'd ever bother to Google them, like... I'm annoyed that I just forgot it. I'll try to remember it at the end.
My aunts Cammie and Aunt Rosetta, who are depicted in that photograph to your far left. Oh, those are my great aunts. My mother's aunts Cammie.
Oh, yes. So he has this picture where it's his parents getting married. I forgot he did this in the beginning and it hasn't shown yet. He's had this up the whole time. And this is his like crescendo where he ends it. And he's just like, there are my parents and there's me in her belly right now. I'm about to be born. And then like he's going to go how every single one of these people is a criminal and that's their fault. And there's definitely no systemic things to worry about here. This was all individual choices about how these people chose to be criminals. He chose to be a criminal. They chose to be criminals. They all chose to be criminals. And they should have just chosen not to be criminals because that was just a thing that they decided to do.
Rosetta, who fenced stolen goods as a regular course of events. They had young women who were shoplifting clothing and foodstuffs from retailers. And then They give those girls 20 or 30 cents on the dollar, and the aunts kept big freezers in their basement so that whenever you had a family affair, you knew that you didn't go to the market to buy your ham or your turkey. You went to Aunt Cammy or Aunt Rosetta, and you got a better price. These are church ladies wearing the big hats. They were the salt of the earth, these people, but that's what they did. The book I'm currently writing is a memoir. It paints a vivid picture of my upbringing in Chicago in the 1950s and 60s with characters like my mother, Gloria. There she is, so gorgeous, so beautiful. Her nickname was Go-Go.
So, to pause this for a second on his little diatribe about his family, I could have sworn there was a section where he goes through more of them. Maybe it's just not right here. He goes through how, like, one of his uncles died of this, someone actually shot himself. He goes down through a grocery list of, like, fucking people and all the bad things they did and how these were all individual choices, basically, made in a vacuum, devoid of the systemic things that surround them at all times. Anyway, you could make all of these same observations about Italian Americans or Irish Americans in the early 20th century, even leading into the 50s. Poverty was endemic to those communities too. What he's talking about are things that are byproducts of poverty. And let me see if I can find it real quick. I don't know how I'm forgetting this. Oh, it's strain theory. There we go. Strain theory. Burton? Strain? Hold on. There's another one. I'm pretty sure this one I'm thinking of. Advanced by structure of the process of Okay, yeah. The theory states that society puts pressure on individuals to achieve socially accepted goals such as the American dream, though they lack the means. This leads to strain, which may lead to individuals to commit crime. Basically, the crux of strain theory is that we are pressured in society to achieve certain things. In the USA, the American dream basically means you want to maintain or get some sense of monetary success. We put a very heavy emphasis on achieving material gains in this country. And you have two routes to do that, basically. Legitimate, i.e. start a business, do whatever in that legitimate ends, get a degree, go do whatever. And if you can't do that, then you are driven towards illegitimate ends, because the goal is to achieve those monetary gains is the first and foremost. Now, it's preferable to do that through legitimate aims, but achieving the goal is still paramount. So if you can't do it through legitimate means, you do it through illegitimate means, i.e. selling drugs, becoming involved in prostitutions, blah, 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 whatever they identify here. That's the whole crux of it. So these people who, are living like their day-to-day, who, I have my small business and I'm selling a little marijuana on the side, or like they stole some food and clothes from places and whatever. Yeah, this is a byproduct of living in poverty in a country that puts an enormous pressure socially on achieving economically. Duh. So this is literally like criminology 101 theories. Like, this is not complicated, and he's just oblivious to it or disregards it for his philosophical individualist lens focus. Okay, we're gonna end it here. That's the last little segment I had, and I don't think anything else interesting is gonna come from there. There's a point where he talks about their brothers, Michael Alfred, can be seen on our father. Oh yeah, so yeah, if we keep going on this clip, he's gonna start talking about every single person and how they die or whatever. Oh, and here's his uncle who didn't want integration. What a guy. Now let's go to that real quick, because that's funny. 65.
Over my mother's left shoulder. My Auntie Lois's husband, Uncle Mooney, I used to call him, Uncle, call me when they start integrating the money, Mooney, because that's what he always said about Martin Luther King and integration. He said, I don't want to live next to no white people. You just call me when they start integrating the money. And that was...
What? Oh, this makes me so angry. Okay, let's MLK rally for, MLK march for jobs. Let's see, march on Washington for jobs and freedom. So this is what's so funny, it blows my mind that he's like an economist and he talks about like social issues and he does all this and he's like making fun of his uncle. Tell me when they start integrating the economy, because MLK didn't care about that. He just wanted black people and white people to live in harmony. No, MLK understood it was fucking both. The march was called for jobs and freedom. Having jobs and attaining economic inequality were part and parcel to maintaining social equality. You can't have social equality without economic equality. They're linked, okay? And the fact he like denigrates his uncle in such a way, presumably from his ignorance when he was a kid, and then just did not reflect upon it when writing this shit, um, to like what MLK had fought for. You know, he just sat there negging MLK's fucking widow. So I guess he didn't give a shit, but whatever. So he chose to do that instead of, I don't know, have an informed opinion. But whatever. What are you gonna do? Anyway, the point of going over this was his entire speech here. Someone who I was talking to found moving enough to send to me, as if this demonstrated some coherent or cogent point. It didn't. Now, the entire thing, as he indicated, was very, very personal and focused on what's it called? Sorry. The entire thing was very personal and focused on like his upbringing. It used very, very many anecdotes, didn't use very many evidence-based arguments, and then put the focus at an individual level. And his speech that's central to it focused on individual and community level problems that we need to fix independent from the system, the government, during like the middle of Reagan's administration, which meant there was already a decade plus of systemic disenfranchisement targeting black people due to the war on drugs. Like, it's just absurd. Like, I don't think there's really much more to say there. That the Civil Rights Act happened, Nixon eventually became El Preso, cracked down on black people, ran on the whole law and order thing, started the whole war on drugs, which was then ramped up under Reagan. Like, and he gave a speech in the midst of that, decrying how all their systemic problems are over. He's just profoundly ignorant on this topic. There's another video started autoplaying after this. Maybe I'll do that one too, or at least the first 10 minutes of it. How they just don't understand Black Lives Matter, which is incredible. When I say they, I mean it's him and some other Glenn from Columbia, also a very silly person. But all right, we're gonna end that there. I guess like the reason I really wanted to show it, just to like, I guess finish that thought, was how you can use a very emotionally loaded narrative about how like decisions can always be made better. That seems to appeal to people who want to have this semblance of reason to their argument, and instead they're actually relying entirely on emotionally loaded arguments about how individuals can always make better choices when there's mountains of evidence to the contrary. Can someone make a better decision? Yes. Should we encourage people to make better choices in their lives? Focus on what you can do in your circumstance to improve yourself. Yes, we should do that for people. Because everyone should act individually as though they have control over their own lives and try and work to maximize what they can do in their own lives, okay, to better their circumstance. However, at a societal level, we cannot view problems in this way. It has actually zero capacity to solve problems. When I see like teen pregnancy rates out of control in like low-income areas, probably that are predominantly black, but it's the thing in low-income areas. Do I just say, well, these kids just need to decide to have less sex, and like when they don't decide to have less sex and keep firing out babies into unprepared environments, then what? It doesn't do anything for you. But if you take a structural lens and you say, okay, well, I see that teen pregnancy is a problem in low-income areas. What can I do to fix that? Well, let's do comprehensive sexual education in all schools. That'll help it. But even bigger, let's provide free birth control, free condoms, free regular birth control, or the birth control pill, or whatever means these people want to use. Let's do that. And when we've done the stuff like that in low-income areas, guess what? We find we get, I think it's like $6 or $7 dollars for every dollar we invest into it. You know why? Because for every baby that doesn't come to pass, we have that many less benefits we have to support. This person has less things holding them back in society. So just telling people to make better decisions does absolutely nothing. And that's the terminus of people like Glenn Loury's ideology. Make better decisions. Dog, that's great to tell someone, like when you're talking to your nephew, your kid, your brother, that's great to tell them. But when we're talking about crafting policies or what we can do when we're lobbying members of Congress or our state houses or whatever, it's beyond worthless. It's actually counterproductive because it makes people think, well, we don't have to do anything because really the problem relies in these groups of people. When in actuality, we can do stuff and it's a choice not to do stuff. That is the problem with someone like Glenn Loury. Outro.